always used to talk about it at Live It Now, and specifically the education with surrounding influences and how important surrounding influences are. Because as you guys know, it's the fourth step of the five steps to rapid change. Remember, number one is commit, number two is release, number three is focus. Number four, surrounding influences, which is the one that typically people don't do. In fact, the two that people don't typically do is number one, which is commitment, and number four, which is surrounding influences, because they've got typically the biggest triggers associated to them. You know, like making a really committed decision. You probably had that experience maybe two or three times in your life where you've made that decision where you like cut off everything else. You go like, no more. And then surrounding influences, we talk about it, right? You want to put yourself in an environment or a playground where people are really playing five levels above you. And that might be a mastermind group. It might be, you know, some type of community. And typically it's really uncomfortable because your patterns come up. I mean, for me, what often would come up was, I'm not good enough. Why would they want to spend time with me? They're already successful. All of those types of interesting stories and patterns that start to happen. And I was about 17 and I heard this concept, and I actually think I did a Tony Robbins event the week before or something like that. So I was still on that high. And so in that event, he talked about, you know, your environment is really, really important. And so on a Saturday, I would run along Manly Beach and I'd run past this restaurant called the Bow Restaurant. And I noticed this table every time I ran past this restaurant, especially on a Saturday morning. Do you remember this now, Glenda?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Especially on a Saturday morning, there's this group, right? And they're really successful. You had, say, who was it? You had Noel Carroll, who was the founder of Michelle's Patisserie. You had Steve Driley, who basically owned half of Bow Street and still does. You had Max Walls, who was one of the first real estate agents in Manly. And so you had all of these big players that were very, very successful. And I used to think when I was running past, it would be so incredible to sit at that table and just to listen to what they talk about, how they've got to that, you know, that position. And so anyway, this one particular kind of week, I was like, you know what? Today's going to be the day. You know, I ran past the Bar restaurant, I saw this table, and I turned around, I'm like, come on, Matt, go and introduce yourself. And so I walked in, my chest was puffed up, fired my anchor, and I'm about to get to the table, and I went, fuck, I can't do this. And I went and sat at the table next to them, and I was kind of watching them. They were reading the financial review. So I like grabbed a financial review, started to read that. I'm like, it's the most boring thing I've ever read. Anyway, the owner of the restaurant, who became a friend of mine in the end, Jamil, comes up, and I'd been there for about 20 minutes. And he's like, are you going to buy anything from my restaurant? And at this stage, I was just drinking water and I actually had no money. And I said, no, water's fine. And he said, well, you need to buy something. And I said, I don't have any money. And he said, well, you've got to go. He kicked me out. And so the next week, it's a Saturday, I'm running along, and what popped into my mind is 90% of success is just showing up, and you show up when you don't want to. And so I'm like, come on, Matt, you got to do it. So again, I walked into the restaurant. You know, again, I was going to go up to them, but this time, I freaked out. And I sat at another table a bit further away, kind of in the corner. The owner of the restaurant came up to me again straight away this time. He goes, are you going to buy anything from my restaurant? And I said to him, oh my God, I haven't got any money again. And this time he was like really curious. He's like, what are you doing? Like, you look really awkward. Why are you here? And I said, well, to be honest, see that table over there? They're really successful. And one day I want to be really successful. And I heard if you put yourself in the environment, it rubs off basically. And he just laughed his head off. He said to me, you never want to be like those guys. They're a bunch of assholes. And then he kicked me out of the restaurant. And I remember thinking, well, who's the asshole right now? And anyway, I lost sight of being in that community. But the troublemaking part of me the next week, I was like, I grabbed a $20 bill and I wanted to go there and just buy a breakfast just to go, see, I've got some money now. And so I had my $20 bill and I was like, you know, didn't even think about that group now. And I showed up and I was going to buy a big bow breakfast. And I walked into the restaurant, I sat down, no way near that table, and I hear the owner of the restaurant scream out in front of everyone, the stalker is here. And oh my God, I was so embarrassed. All the patrons were looking at me, the waitresses were looking at me, and some of these waitresses were stunning. And so I was so embarrassed. And he goes, come with me, grabs me takes me over to the table and says, "This is the stalker I've been telling you about." And they're all laughing and they're like, "Sit down. Who are you?" And so I introduced myself and we started to have a bit of a chat. And they're like, "What are you doing? You should be hungover. What are you doing? Why are you here?" And then I started to talk about all of the courses that I'd done. And, I studied NLP when I was 12 and I used to be really dumb. Now I'm really smart and I want to be successful like you guys. And they were like blown away. And one person in particular, Walter, was like, "Oh my God, Matt, I've done these trainings. They were the things that really propelled me and had me be successful." And he was like the CEO of iPrimus Telecommunications. He was also heavily involved in politics. This is where I'm coming back to it now. Heavily involved in politics. And so he was like blown away and they all were blown away. And they said, Matt, we're so impressed with you, especially your passion and your intensity. They said, "We want you to come back. You can come back and sit at our table whenever you want." And that day, they bought the Big Bow breakfast for me. Now, when someone gives you an invitation to come back, what do? You show up. So I showed up every single Saturday. And albeit we didn't necessarily talk a lot about wealth and business and all that type of stuff, the relationships were so strong and they had so much fun together. But what I did start to pick up was some really powerful belief systems. One was business is fun. It's a game, and most people don't play the game. You need to play the game and figure things out. It's all about figuring things out and how to solve problems really, really quickly, but you need to add fun to it. That is the key. And they said to me things like, a business should be built from the beginning to create an incredible life. And that's what they did. I remember seeing a few occasions that were so incredible where they all said, "Okay, where do you want to go? Let's go on a world trip together." And not all of them went. It was only like 2 or 3. And they said, "Okay, we can't use any of our money to pay for this trip. We want to go away in 2 months. How can we do it? We've got to come up with some type of product or service or an idea that has to pay for everything." And so I saw these guys start brainstorming on a Saturday, and then they've come up with this idea. They're on the phone to their solicitors and their accountants. Everything's like executed straight away. So like by Monday morning, they're in operation. And then by the next week, I come back to the table and they're like, "Yeah, we did close to $250,000 in this week." And some of these ideas are multi-million dollar businesses now. And they were able to achieve these kind of ideas, very, very quickly because they had the right team, the right intensity, the right ideas, the right creativity, and they were able to figure things out and solve problems very, very quickly. And if you think about a business, right, that's what you want to do. You want to look at every single department and you want to be able to solve problems efficiently, better than anyone else. So like you start with sales and then you make yourself redundant in sales. How can you solve the sales problem very, very quickly, faster than anyone else? Then you transition to marketing. Marketing is clients chasing you. How can you have clients chasing you without a lot of effort in the most fastest possible time frame? Operations. How can we set up operations in a way that it is just sleek, that it generates referrals very, very quickly, almost from day one? Admin and finance. How can we put systems and structures in place so that admin and finance is like the glue, that it's automated, it's structured with the right people in there? Literally, I would see them hit like 100K weeks so quickly. And that's where I got that concept, the 100K week from, is these guys, because that's what they always thought. Straight up, how do we do a 100K week in the fastest possible time frame? And typically they do it within 1 to 2 weeks with new ideas and concepts, because that's what the focus was. So I watched this and it was such an incredible experience because I got to see a bit of an insight around belief systems, behavior, execution, and most importantly, the questions that they asked themselves. That was the most powerful thing, because I was like 17 years old and I would watch my friends and my family and their programming, and it was completely different. My friends would say, "Why does this always happen to me?" Or "I can't," like incantations. "I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do this." And these guys really kind of smashed that out of me, especially the "I can't," because when you constantly say "I can't," you're now filtering. You're now filtering all of the reasons. That's all that you're seeing unconsciously. And so you may want to write this one down because it really changed my life, these two questions. And it is really the foundation of one of my company names, Your Future Now. And the first question is that you ask yourself, what do I want? Now, most people are focused on what they don't want because they're asking themselves that question. I don't want this. I don't want this. No, 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 no. You ask yourself, what do I want? Gets you on almost like a true target, right? What do I want? Okay. And then the next question is, how can I have it? See, what do I want takes you out into the future, right? How can I have it brings you back to present time. Now, if you look at my company name, one of my company names, Your Future Now. Your future, we go out, and what do you want? Your future, true target. And then we come back to now. How can I have it? Now, the key to this question, and please write this part, this is how you make it work, is you ask this question when your back's against the wall. It's easy to ask this question when you feel safe. But it's when all your wounds are firing, you feel everything's going to collapse. What do I want? How can I have it? And so I remember like Walter being probably out of all of them, like Steve and Walter were probably the ones that really nurtured me and supported me the most. And I was like, you know, I'd done all of these coaching courses and I was like 19 years old now. And I wanted to launch my first business in coaching, and not one of my friends and family members supported me. In fact, my friends did an intervention on me. They invited me over to dinner. There was 12 of them, and some of them were so triggered, and they had no idea what coaching was. And they're like, Matt, but you're really shy, you're anxious, you're not confident, you're not a Tony Robbins. What are you talking about? You're never going to be successful. And look, if you looked at me back then, they're probably right with that energy. But it was so challenging to hear that it almost took me out of the game. It didn't quite take me out of the game, but what really took me out of the game was my mum's partner, John, who was in business. He was a civil engineer, and I really looked up to him as an authority, and he turned around and said, this industry is bullshit. They're a bunch of scammers. They come from overseas. They take your money. It's not an industry that is going to last. You should stay in IT. You're skyrocketing up the organization. They love you. You're a national sales manager. I'm trying to be a national sales manager at 19. And I'm like, but I hate every single day. I hate it. And he said, well, you know, you're never going to be successful, Matt, because same thing. You lack confidence. You're petrified of public speaking. How is this ever going to work? John got through to me. And I remember I went back to that table. And this particular day, I was just so deflated. It was like my dreams had just been taken away from me. And Walter picked up on it straight away. He pulled me aside and he said, Matt, what's going on? Where's the Matt that has a spark? What's happened? What's happened to you? He said, tell me about this business, this coaching business. Sounds awesome. And I said, oh, it's bullshit. They're a bunch of scammers. Now, who would I become? John. I was talking the same way, using the same language, using the same predicates and words. And he said, who's in your head? This is how wise Walter was back then. Who's in your head? That's not you. Who have you been speaking to? And I said, John. And he said, well, I don't know, John, but let me ask you a couple of questions. Has John ever done a personal development course in his life? And I said, no. Has he read any books? I said, no. Has he even sat down with you and looked at the deal, looked at the financials, looked at the plans that you put in place? Because you've shown me a 100-page business plan and you spent months on this. Has he even looked at that? I said I gave it to him, but he never looked at it. And he said, well, what the fuck does he know? Honestly, without being offensive, all respect to John, but how is he the authority of an industry when he has no idea? And he said, Matt, I believe in you, even if you don't believe in yourself. And he said, I've been around high-performance leaders long enough to know a leader when I see one. And he said, this stuff that you're telling yourself about being shy and all of this type of stuff, it is bullshit. He said, I saw you show up at the restaurant, sit at that table with a bunch of billionaires and share a vision of passion. He said, that's not a normal thing. And he said, I believe in you. I will support you. And I said, would you pay for the course for me? He said, no. He said, I would never rob you of your first entrepreneurial journey. And he said to me, Matt, what did I tell you? When you want something and your back's against the wall, you don't say, I can't. You say, what do I want? How can I have it? And he said to me, Matt, let me tell you, if you move mountains to get into this course, it won't be like the previous courses where it was easy to get in there. You had an inheritance off your dad, all of that type of stuff. He said, if you move mountains to get into this course, it will be the turning point that has you become so successful because you will commit at a higher level. And that's what I did. I went and sold Cadbury chocolates door to door. I went and sold a car. I sold clothes. I can't remember all these other crazy things that I did. And I got into the course. And he was right because I'd moved mountains and I'd done whatever it took. I showed up at a higher level. And that was really the turning point where I started to believe in myself because someone had created a really supportive environment and really shown me that kind of belief. And that's what he said, go on, I believe in you until you start believing in yourself. And so when it comes to Walter, I've been very grateful. And he was heavily involved in politics because he wanted to change the political landscape. And he always said to me, Matt, my passion is to shine a light and watch the cockroaches run. That's what I want to do. And he really did that. He was one of the key people that disrupted the entire Liberal Party. And it was all over the news because he wanted a fair vote. He was like, it's a boys' club at the top, and they just keep putting each other in. And they're doing deals with each other. They're not listening to the entire community. And he said, I want equal votes for every single member. And that just launched this incredible conflict. You know, albeit that he didn't get the changes that he wanted, it started to make some significant transformations within that group. It was really interesting. Walt was Tony Abbott's campaign manager, Malcolm Turnbull's campaign manager, and I saw him devote so much of his time and energy to this political party because he was so worried about the future of this country. And he got treated really badly, and he was a troublemaker within that group, which I really loved. And one day, I used to have this penthouse. It was like the biggest penthouse in the Southern Hemisphere. It was on Manly Beach. It was 4 apartments turned into one. It was literally like Tony Stark's apartment, had the elevator opening up. And they wanted to do the Liberal Party there, Christmas party. And so, you know, there was probably 200 people in my apartment. Walter was there, and Mike Baird was there, and he did this presentation about politics. And this is probably the one presentation that I actually liked out of all of them. He said, Matt, politics is a really interesting thing. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how much you give. There's always going to be someone that's going to be angry. And he said, it's like you could stand on the corner and give out $20 bills, but there is going to be one person that's going to turn around and go, why didn't you give me 50? And so I took that philosophy from a business point of view. Is that you're never going to make everyone happy, no matter how much you give and how much you support. Some people, no matter what the situation is going to be pissed off. You know, rounding this story back, Walter came. This was like a big moment for me. Walter came to Ultimate Life Recharge about 2 years ago, and we're up on the volcano in Byron Bay. We're recharging, and I helped him get connected back to his authentic self before politics, before corporate. And he was like this hippie surfer. And funnily enough, it was Byron Bay that he used to surf in. And he was like, oh my God, this is incredible. Like, I feel like I'm back. And I was really apprehensive to have Walter at, this event, like our retreat. I didn't know how he was going to respond. Would he like it? I'm putting him up on a pedestal. He got to the end of the program and he stood up and he burst into tears. And he said, this is the best management course I've ever done in my life. And I'm like, it's a retreat, mate. It's not a management course. And he goes, I don't care. It is the best experience I've ever had. After Ultimate Life Recharge, he left politics and he took his daughter around Europe for 2 months. And to this day, he was like, that was probably the most profound experience of my life. So it's interesting how it goes full circle. And so, yeah, anyway, that's the story of the Liberal Party and how we're now connected indirectly to the Liberal Party and all of their events. So there you go, guys.